Hello, I thought it'd be nice to have a domestic backdrop today. I want to talk to you today about some work that I discovered just before Christmas on a visit to the Max Planck Institute for Molecular Cell Biology and Genetics in Dresden. And there I met Timo Kurz-Charlier, who is working on a whole bunch of things. He's particularly interested in lipids, but one of the systems that he was looking at was a nematode worm that seemed to have evolved an extraordinary survival mechanism. Now, this nematode worm is called Pristiontius pacificus, and like most nematodes, it's essentially parasitic. This one lives off scarab beetles. What it does is to infect the beetle and wait for it to die, and then to feed off the rotting corpse. So such is the life of parasites like this, but occasionally they will find themselves in conditions of stress where perhaps the temperature is too high or there's not enough food around. And they've evolved a survival mechanism for getting out of that position, for getting somewhere else. And it goes like this. What the worms do, these are tiny microscopic worms, and at the larval stage, when they're under stress, they essentially arrest their development, or at least slow down their metabolism, and enter a kind of a state called a dour state, which has this lower metabolism, so there's less need for energy, and it's almost like a suspended animation, but they do have some movement still. So this is part of the survival mechanism, but the worm has clearly decided this isn't enough. And what these organisms do is that in some conditions, under in that situation, they secrete a waxy substance onto just the surface of their bodies, and this is an adhesive. It enables them to stick together. And the worms somehow, and it's not clear how, maybe there's a chemical signal involved, somehow they aggregate together, they crawl together, and then climb on top of each other and form extraordinary little structures that can be up to several millimeters, almost in fact a centimeter long, some of them, that consist perhaps of 1,000 or so of these microscopic worms stuck together with this waxy substance. And it protrudes like a little hair from the substance, from the surface that they're sitting on. And then the worms wave. It's called nictation, but basically it's just kind of waving like this. Now this is something that the individual worms do in conditions of stress, but when they do it collectively, the whole tower begins to bend and wave. And the researchers that have found that have been investigating this phenomenon call these little structures dour towers. And it seems that what's going on is that by waving in this way, the worms are increasing the probability that they will get, or at least the ones at the top, will get picked up perhaps by some passing insect and taken to another place where the prospects might be better. So it's basically a strategy for calling attention to itself and hitching a ride and seeing whether it can find pastures greener. So it's all down to this extraordinary wax molecule, and it's an unusual one. It has a very long hydrocarbon chain, in fact 2 hydrocarbon chains that are joined at the top into a kind of a hairpin-like structure. So to make something this big involves a considerable metabolic cost. It requires quite a lot of energy to make this molecule. And so clearly the investment is worth it, that somehow or another this survival strategy has evolved because it's useful, because it works well enough under these conditions to get the worms into better conditions. So that's really the story of these dour towers, and I guess this adds to a growing list of survival strategies that microorganisms and microscopic creatures seem to have evolved. It reminded me of the behaviour of the slime mold, Dictyostelium discoideum, which also in times of stress is able to send out chemical signals that enable the single-celled organisms to aggregate together, again building large structures. And what the slime mold builds are what they call fruiting bodies, which are kind of stalks with a bunch of spores in suspended animation at the top that just sort of stay there until times get better and the spores can be dispersed. So this is the one of the means by which these nematode worms propagate, and it just shows what an extraordinary combination you can get from I guess, clever organic chemistry within the molecule and collective behavior of the organisms. This is the paper that reports the work in Nature Chemical Biology and my story about it in Chemistry World.